Alfonso Gomez-Rejon is a director and executive producer of Amazon's revenge thriller Hunters, which is about the search for fugitive Nazis in America. For starters, what were your thoughts about this, bold and potentially controversial story when you first read the script?
I was incredibly moved by it. Just emotionally, I just connected to Logan's journey, his character of Jonah, and I guess I've always liked outsiders and underdogs, and certainly I loved his kind of emotional journey, and I was obviously challenged by the tone of it because you're juggling some pulp kind of action or violence, incredibly strong, very emotional, subplots, and we have the Holocaust. It should feel like a graphic novel. So it, and there's the extraordinary world of the Hunters, and you have the real world of 70s New York, and how to juggle it all was, I guess, a bit of a challenge, and one that I just kind of really sparked to, and I had an idea of how we could do it and how we could pull it off, and so I had a meal with David Weil, who wrote the script, and show ran with Nikki Toscano, and I think we all agreed on the vision, and I was also excited that it was going to be like a feature, and that we would prep it accordingly, and that worked out.
Directing that first episode, especially as the lead off to this show that, as you mentioned, has these very different tones kind of blending together into this whole, like, what was the most challenging part of sort of making that tone kind of be a coherent whole that felt like the same, like one creative vision?
I think to me the key was that all the emotions had to feel real, and that was the spine of it. The naturalistic performances, so that everyone felt they were a part of the same story, and also the visual language of it, kind of the vocabulary that Fred Elms and I, who shot it, and I'm blanking on everybody's names. Jesus Christ. Kurt Beach and John Dunn were production designer and costume designer. And I think we all created together this visual language and with very specific kind of symbolic meanings behind color that helped create a cohesive visual style that with little clues that start from the very first sequence, which is kind of this super American illusion of safety that isn't quite what you expect, as it slowly starts to kind of unravel in front of your eyes, kind of set the tone. And from that point on, it always had a bit of a kind of stylized naturalism. But then as soon as Jonah kind of enters the extraordinary world of the Hunters and that whole revenge story, it becomes a little more graphic, as if there were panels out of a graphic novel. And so I think together you work on you agree on a certain tone, and to me, I think the spine of that is the performances, and believing every one of these characters, never judging any of them to an extent, and feeling love for certainly our heroes. And I think that I did feel that, and I think that's tactile. I think you feel that, and as long as that kind of spine felt real, I think the visual language just kind of embraced it.
And even though this story is fictional, it does involve a real operation that the U.S. government brought in a lot of German scientists, including Nazis, to work for the U.S. government. Were you familiar with that sort of real background behind the show before you became a part of it, or how much of that surprised you?
Oh, it's always surprising and horrific. The more you learn about it, as a kid, I think I learned about this through movies, which is probably Marathon Man. Then I explored a little of Operation Paperclip on an episode of American Horror Story, second season. So I had done some research, but of course there was more and more research done in preparation for this pilot, and it's horrific. And then it becomes, the challenge is, how does that storyline fit into how do you balance the tone of that, which is horrific and hard to forget, without upsetting the balance of the rest of the emotions that you're trying to juggle.
And the first episode really kind of hits the ground running with this really kind of first seemingly idyllic scene, but then turns into this horrific scene where Dylan Baker is one of these undercover Nazis and ends up, sort of massacring his entire family and his guests when his cover is blown at that particular moment. But it's a very kind of visceral scene. What was it like kind of shooting that scene and really having that as the launch pad for what the story was?
Yeah, well, a lot of thought went into that sequence. I think all through, Fred Elms and I, and Bill Connor, our first AD, we prepped the film carefully and, shot listed everything, even though when you get on set, you could always, riff and there's always going to be a better idea there. But that first sequence, we knew that that it had to be kind of a defining moment for the entire series. So it should feel like one continuous shot that starts big and wide and colorful, and it slowly starts to close in on her until you reveal the true horror that is, who Dylan Baker is, and you end up in an extreme close-up as the world starts to kind of tighten around her. And so that kind of subconscious feeling of feeling trapped in the outdoors was something that it was designed carefully. Again, the color scheme of it with the red, being the clue that, it signifies blood and also symbolizes anything having to do with the Fourth Reich, is there in Dylan's apron and in the red jello. It's all, clues are everywhere, but hopefully they affect you in some kind of subconscious way, and little by little you start getting it as you slowly start revealing it throughout the series. But it was a way to balance even performance, which is Dylan's slightly in an alternate reality as he's pretending to be this super American politician, and slowly have that kind of collapse into itself.
And of course, Al Pacino stars in the series as the leader of the Hunters, and it's his first regular series role of his career. What was it like, working with him? It seems like he must be kind of like a director's dream to work with. So what was it like, sort of getting to introduce him and his character and that performance?
It was a beautiful process, because obviously I'm an enormous fan. I mean, his movies are in my DNA, and to have the opportunity to meet him, I had met him through some acquaintances, a few months before, just by chance, and having that first meeting with him at his house, it was David and Nikki and myself, and just watching how he absorbed the character by asking very specific questions that got to the subtext of a scene, and little by little how he would let them set for a bit and settle, and then he reduced it to something beautiful and incredibly illuminating, like the character's loneliness, and then, which of course inspires me in some ways of how to shoot that and how to communicate that sense of loneliness and isolation in him. And just the way he approaches his character with so much love, and how much he enjoys the craft of acting, and how selfless he is, and how he kind of surrenders himself to you as a director and puts his trust in you. And I think that says so much about him as an actor who has achieved everything, and also as a director, as a fellow filmmaker, to trust in my vision. And it was his process was a beautiful one, because he, I love how he rehearses over and over until he forgets it, and then he's just in the moment. and to be in the moment, witnessing and having the privilege of witnessing Pacino being in the moment is something I'll never forget.
And a lot of the, as you mentioned, being emotionally grounded to the story, to bring it all together. A lot of that also comes from Jeannie Berlin, especially in that first episode as Jonah's grandmother. And we get to see her for a brief time before her character is murdered and sort of the inciting incident for the whole rest of the series. What was it like that scene between her and Jonah, where we really kind of get a sense of their bond together, and that really lovely moment before kind of everything goes ballistic?
Oh, Jeannie Berlin, I'm a huge fan of hers and her mom's. I almost went up to Jeannie Berlin when I went to the closing night of her mom's play, Waverly Gallery, but I just didn't have the courage. I'm not sure why, but I loved her in The Night Of. I've loved her in so many movies, it was just, that scene with Logan is a very simple setup. It's just two singles in a wide, maybe something a little wider, but it was all about their performances, and to see them find the different kind of there has to be, it had to feel real again, and to kind of explore that bond between them. And sometimes it's in the way she touched him or the way she delivered a line, and finally different, kind of calibrating it until and certainly that continues in the cutting room until we find a moment that actually had to feel so real and bittersweet in the way it ends, and that was really the kind of the emotional spine for that character. And that moment was something he was, that Logan would be replaying throughout the series, because that's the final memory of his mom, certainly, right before she gets shot. But and the, what he should have said, the regret that's going to be a lot of his fuel throughout the season. And but it was a very simple scene to shoot on a technical aspect, but it let us just explore performance and certainly keep calibrating it in post.
And in addition to disturbing scenes like the beginning scene, the opening scene with Dylan Baker, you also have flashbacks to the Holocaust, which must have been kind of difficult to stage. You staged this sort of horrific human chess scene that is being remembered. What was it like, shooting that? Was it a very emotional kind of process? Was it a very difficult process to figure out how to kind of approach it in a way that felt real and emotional, but also kind of respected the subject matter and the history of just the atrocities of Nazi Germany?
Yeah, these are very complicated scenes to shoot, and you start discussing them very early in the process. It's out of respect for the history and the memory of everyone that either died or was able to survive those horrible atrocities, and also respect for the actors in the moment that are living the moment for you over and over and over again. And also, technically, to create a way into the window into that history that also fit into the visual style of the whole show, so that you could, for instance, in the first sequence, it's the introduction of young Ruth, but it's going from macro to micro, seeing the beginning. That's the Łódź Ghetto sequence, the beginning of the atrocities, the scale of them, until we reduce it down to her, and then eventually her point of view. And that feels more like a memory that we can get into and out of, and continue the kind of and stay with Jonah the entire time without losing the audience. And the same goes for the second, the chess sequence, which is also suggests more than you actually see. And so that's a way to, in keeping with our visual style, it's show the history, rooted in character. Certainly this would be, Ruth's memory that she's telling Jonah about, and just being disciplined about the point of view, and never showing too much just to get a reaction, but how to keep it emotionally truthful to our lead, and have it propel the story as opposed to distract or have it be too hard to recover from that and not be able to continue watching the episode and the entire series. So it was a fine balance of trying to create a way of showing that and shooting it in a way that felt like a memory as opposed to something that felt very documentary style. And that would come in future episodes as it's reinterpreted by other filmmakers. But I think I certainly felt strongly to start and make it feel like a memory of sorts and impressionistic at times until we kind of settle in, and ground it, and then other episodes could then take over from there.
And the first season ends on some very dramatic cliffhangers and revelations. Do you know at all what the status of a season 2 might be, if that could be in the works, or are you allowed to say anything about anything?
I know very little. I think it deserves many seasons, and there are many journeys that these characters would take that I would follow them on, and so I'm hopeful that that it does continue.
And you mentioned working for, directing for American Horror Story. You also directed Glee, and those are also shows that have a very interesting tonal balance. They combine a lot of elements to them. Do you feel like those sorts of experiences kind of prepared you for this one in a way?
I guess it all prepares me. Sure, it all prepares me. I just love actors so much, and I think this story, Hunters, was so important to tell, and so timely for so many reasons. But I think exploring a variety of juggling musical theater with high school drama, that's one thing that always existed in some kind of like, alternate kind of heightened reality, and American Horror, I think, is similar. Certainly, the first couple of episodes of seasons, because I think it's grounded in real emotion, even though sometimes it goes into some kind of wild subplots, but I always believed every moment of Jessica Lange, for instance, or Sarah Paulson, and there's something about just loving actors and loving the characters they're portraying that I think is what interests me the most.
Well, I want to congratulate you on Hunters, and fingers crossed for season 2, and of course, under the circumstances we're all in America right now, that productions can commence at some point in the near future safely. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Likewise, thank you so much.